I think we have everyone here who's going to be attending from the board, and we have Senator Ortiz Pino is with us on Zoom. New Mexico somewhere. Sounds good. Unless you're next to the fire. Anyway, so this is a special meeting of the board. I don't believe we have a quorum, right? We do not. Okay, so can you confirm that Senator's on it?
He is on. Okay.
Alicia Manzano is also on Zoom for Representative
Javier
I am
Martinez.
on, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. So, we do have a quorum, and we'll call the meeting to order. And welcome everyone. Lawrence Rowell, representing the mayor, is not able to join us today, nor is Commissioner Quesada or Senator Padilla. But we do have a quorum present, and we will we'll move forward. I'll just introduce everyone here today. I'm Council President Isaac Benton. I'm the chair of the advisory board. Representative Miguel Garcia. As was mentioned, Stephen is Margarita Archibek.
She was also.
Okay, so Stephen Michael Quesada is not present. Jay Remby, who's a long-standing member of the board representing the Urban Land Institute of New Mexico. Liba Fried from the Wheels Museum. Eddie Garcia. We don't see Eddie, but
he could make it today, so I'm filling in. And I'm Francis Armijo from South Broadway neighborhood.
thank you, Francis, for being here, and we appreciate your involvement, and Eddie's. And then Dorothy Chavez from the Brelis neighborhood. We also have our staff here present at the table: Petra Morris from City Council Services, Diane Dolan, who is our organizer of the meeting, Nathan Molina, who's my policy analyst on the council. And I think that's the extent of staff present. And let's see, we have our team who will introduce themselves shortly. But I'll move approval of the minutes from our last meeting of August 4th. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Representative Garcia. And all those in favor say yes. Yes. Opposed, that passes. And now we will move on to our agenda. And this is a special meeting of the board. Normally, the board has 3 standing meetings per year. We kind of scheduled those and tried to work around the legislative session because we had such great support from our legislators that represent the rail yards area and the neighborhood surrounding. But this is a special meeting because we are looking at an update of the master plan of the rail yards. So we have consensus planning here. We'll introduce themselves here in just a minute. And they've been contracted to take a look at this document. The history of the master plan is that this board, over the years, early in its existence, after we acquired the rail yards, had a series of discussions and meetings and about land uses. And this board, as you can see, is represented, importantly, is representing the neighborhoods as well. So these neighborhood representatives are chosen by their neighborhoods to deal specifically with the rail yard site. Back at that time, and I'm going to forget the chronology exactly, but many years past, the board worked on a set of criteria. I think we came to pretty much unanimous agreement on a set of criteria about how the rail yard should unfold, over the years. And we know it's a huge project. It's not just going to come to pass in one day. But the process of how it would occur and what uses importantly, what uses were acceptable to the neighborhood and which ones were not at the rail yards were all kind of hashed out and worked out. Then we went out to this board also worked with the city planning and purchasing to put out a request for proposals for developers. And a developer was chosen from California called Samatar Constructs. The board then began to work with that developer on a master plan that reflected all of these, what I would call community values with regard to the rail yards, but that also reflected Samatar's development plans for the rail yard. That's what we want to kind of clean up now because Samatar is no longer on the scene. Mayor Keller pretty much terminated that contract when he came in due to lack of activity on Samatar's part. And so there's a lot of, although the document is a good document still from a land use regulation standpoint, it does not, it also has a lot of extraneous information and images within it that are strictly came from Samatar's development concept. And so we're here today and we're beginning a process. It's the first public meeting of the process to talk about how we want to go about that. But we consider it on the council anyway. I think we consider it a cleanup of the existing site plan, which is, again, it's a land use plan. It's not, there are a lot of fancy drawings in the book that Samatar produced that aren't really relevant anymore. So I'm going to kind of peel that back and leave it and come away with something that's still reflective of the values that we stated originally, but that will serve better going forward and more clarity going forward as a land use document. So we have consensus planning here. I'm going to pretty much turn the meeting over to them. We will have the ability for Q&A from the audience as we go forward, but let's hear from Jim Strozier and I'm so sorry, Jackie Fishman from Consensus Planning, and they'll introduce themselves and get us started. And Petra Morris is our land use expert, planning at the council staff, and she's leading from the council staff side.
Great. Well, thank you, Councilor, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Jim Strozier. I'm one of the principals at Consensus Planning, and with me today is
Jackie Fishman, another principal of Consensus Planning. Thank you for having us. Right.
we have a presentation, and it's really designed to be an interactive conversation with the board, trying to prompt some questions and discussions about various aspects consistent with the counselor's introduction on what our goals are here for this. So.
Right. Thank you, Jim. I have a fairly brief presentation. It's mostly posing some questions and discussion items, so I'll go through it and see what we have to say about this. Okay, so the intent of the update to the plan, we've been working on it for probably a month or two, trying to go through the plan, figure out what needs to be struck. Like the counselor said, there's a number of items in there that are Samatar specific design concepts. So we're trying to peel that back. And I'll show you a page example of that. But we want to make sure that the document remains current and applicable. We also recognize that Samatar is no longer the master developer. Basically, the city of Albuquerque is the master developer. We want to remove the design concepts that are Samatar specific. One example is my favorite example, the acoustic berms that were along Second Street. We want to also, and this is a discussion item, revisit the need to create multiple parcels on the site. If you recall from the site plan in the master plan, there it shows 10 different parcels and land uses assigned by parcel. We want to reflect in the update the new comprehensive plan that was adopted in 2017 and the IDO that was adopted the year after that in 2018. We also want to reflect the physical improvements that have been made to the property and the buildings. Also add some summaries of post master plan studies. We've been reaching out to the various architects and engineers that have worked on the site in the last several years and incorporating their drawings into the site plan that is contained in the master plan. So I just wanted to show a page, an example of what we've been doing at our office on the red line. So if something is we're proposing to delete is in the document, we have struck it through, made it in red, so it's very clear. Anything that's new would also be in red and underlined. And then you can see where I've crossed out some of the images. Those are the acoustic mounds that I mentioned along Second Street. So that's what the red line document is going to look like. Have some nice site photos from our site visit several weeks ago with Petra and Ed Adams and others. Okay, so one of the things, and Petra and I talked yesterday, you know, there's policies and goals and things in the master plan that remain relevant today, and those aren't going away. And the one that really speaks to land use is this goal: the rail yards will become a model for mixed use development. I won't read the whole thing, but that's sort of the umbrella kind of policy that we're working with on this update. Again, our current land use approach, the master plan shows 10 different parcels, assigns the specific land use by parcel. And then, and just for background, those parcels were based on Samatar's anticipated development schedule. Now that they're out of the picture, that schedule really doesn't make any sense anymore. This is just another page in the document. It shows the land uses by parcel. It shows FARs, floor area ratios, and some other items, building height and parking, and there are not all that different. Some of them between the different land uses in terms of what it allows or what it doesn't allow. So that's just a page in the document. Okay, so beginning our discussion, we wanted to talk because we're all land use planners. We'd love to talk about land use. So we wanted to talk about some of the options that we think are available to us. And they're all posed as questions. And this is really meant to be a discussion. And I don't know, Petra, how you want to organize that. I'll go through the different options and then we can talk about it. The first one, keep the parcels, and those are the 10 parcels shown on the site plan, and assign land uses in place. So basically don't change that part of the master plan. Second option we thought about was, well, maybe we assign land uses by area and just show the north area, the central area, and the south area. Another option is we could allow all the land uses that are listed in the current master plan to go anywhere on the site, except for maybe certain uses that would be restricted. And, you know, one example that we thought about was parking. I don't know that we think, and, you know, that's really a question, whether parking should go everywhere on the site or should it be limited. And then, you know, lastly, do we just allow all uses anywhere on the site?
Petra?
So that is kind of our first sort of main start of the discussion with you guys. So we'd like to sort of hear from the board how you feel about this idea. If you think about what Jackie's just presented, it's kind of a spectrum of approaches. So we started with the least flexible. The last option is the most flexible, and we really need some direction from the board on how you would like us to approach this. As Jackie explained in reviewing Samattar, this is Samattar stuff in the master plan. This is really, most of the work that we're doing is strike throughs and crosses and updated new text. And it's technical in nature, but it's not substantive. It's not substantively changing the master plan. And so they're not necessarily changes that we need to have a long conversation about, but we do need to have a conversation about this approach because we've come up with 4 different ways, and potentially what we hear today, maybe we come up with a 5th or 6th different way of approaching the land use. We do need direction from the board on how to approach the land use without diverging from the overarching goals, which we had up on that slide before about, you know, this is a mixed use site. And so how we approach this as a mixed use site from a land use perspective is our big question for today.
Petra, could we, or consultants, could we go through the list of all, I guess that would be that one chart of
Yeah.
just speak to each of the land uses that are allowed in some place on the site. And
Yes.
then
You able to make that any larger?
Good
I've
question.
got my master plan.
Got it in my book.
If I could borrow Jackie's book and give Diane mine, Diane can make copies of this
yeah, why don't we
page.
just get a copy of that one page
Yeah.
for the board? That'd be great.
Yeah, and while Diane's doing that, I can kind of read through them. So the first parcel, it starts down at the south. And so that one includes the turntable, the Babbitt shop, the welding shop, and the south washroom. So that's kind of the big southern chunk. It's mostly open right now, but it's got that small cluster of buildings right by the machine shop, and then of course the turntable. So the approved uses in the master plan for that parcel are cultural facilities, e.g. museum, performing arts, and railroad related facilities and parking. Those are the only uses allowed on that big parcel. The second parcel is the platform, and so that's actually quite a small one. It's just south of Wheels, and it goes to the southern end of the property. That parcel allows only workforce housing. Parcel number 3, which is the storehouse, so that one's basically where Wheels is, and then a little bit of platform, and it goes to the street, and the back of it backs up to parcel 1. That allows cultural facilities, for example, a museum, and it allows live work. Parcel 4 is the bridge crane. That's the crane that is on the outside of the machine shop. So it's the long, narrow area that runs between the machine shop and the small cluster of the south washroom, the Babbitt shop, and the welding shop. That allows for a public commons area, so plaza area, accessory retail, education, public art venue, and rail related facilities. Parcel 5 is the machine shop. And the list of uses for that is business and professional uses, office, light manufacturing, training and education, accessory cultural uses, and railroad-related facilities. Parcel 6 is the transfer table. So that's the big area between the boiler shop and the machine shop. That is listed only as a public commons area, i.e. a open plaza area. Parcel 7 is the blacksmith shop, and that allows for business and professional uses, office, light manufacturing, training and education, cultural facilities, and retail. Parcel 8 is the boiler shop, the tank shop, and the flue shop. The tank shop is what we often call the tender repair. So that's that kind of U shape that now goes around the North Plaza. That allows for business and professional uses, office, light manufacturing, and training and education. Parcel 9 is the firehouse and the waste and paint rooms. This is this parcel kind of goes around the northern edge and kind of wraps along 2nd Street and then 1st Street. Yeah. That one allows for public commons area, commercial uses, retail, restaurants, service uses, and housing. And then parcel 10, which doesn't have any historic resources listed in it, but it's where the sheet metal shed used to be and the north washroom, and then it's all of the northern end of the site that doesn't actually have any structures on it. That has allowed for business and professional uses, office, light manufacturing, training, education, and parking. So as you can see, the site is broken up into 10 very specific parcels. Some of them are building specific, some of them are more area based, but there are pretty specific lists of uses allowed in each area. And in some instances, they're very broad. The machine shop's got a relatively broad range of uses allowed there. Others are very limited. For example, parcel 1 allows cultural facilities, railroad related facilities, and parking. And that's a very big portion of the site to only allow those 3 uses.
Go ahead.
I'll give you my 2 cents. And, you know, I don't live in the neighborhood, but we all realize how hard this site has been to be developed. And I think we're finally in a position where maybe something could happen. I would, from my experience, I would give this site as much opportunity to be successful, which means don't restrict any one area to one use, and let the site and the future development plan dictate where these things go, because it's going to ebb and flow with the economy. And if we're too restrictive, I think it's just going to put more pressure on the site getting developed, and we could be here for another 10 years and have the same discussion. Certainly you can put rules in there that protect the neighborhood where they feel comfortable that it's not going to, you know, be a detriment. But the more flexibility, and this has been my mantra from day one, the more flexibility zoning has, the more likely you will see a better project, in my opinion. And the more housing you can add to it, even the better. It's easier to finance. It adds more heads and eyes on the streets, and it just gives the project a lot more dynamic feel, and it becomes 24/7. So I would encourage as much housing as possible too.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Samatar didn't want to put any housing on the site. We forced that issue. That's a non-starter to say there would not be housing on the site, because housing money was used to acquire the site originally. So it was part of the funding. The Workforce Housing Trust Fund, which still exists today and is an important fund within the city, was used to purchase the site. Now it was just one component of the purchase, but that requires that we have housing in the site. I think Jay's point, it speaks to the problem with the current, this chart, in that housing is just relegated to one corner of the site, except is a mention of possible live work housing down towards that same area. And there's also, this is again at my insistence at the time, they left it in along the edge, those properties where the firehouse is and those little small buildings that are along that Second Street edge. And they weren't going to have it there either, but we did end up plugging that in as a possible use there. But again, these restrictive, this parcelization is a detriment to any future development. I think the important thing, though, is looking at all of those uses that are allowed and recognizing that these are uses that the neighborhoods recognize as being acceptable to them on the site, and recognizing that, yes, there's going to be some parking on the site. What that looks like, obviously, is going to depend on the design. And then last but not least, any development of this site, explain if you would, Petra or consultants, the procedure for developing this even now, I believe would have to go to the planning commission. So there would be a public approval process on any development proposal for the site that's not temporary.
Yes, that's correct. The
Or
site-
remedial, like the roof work and things
Yeah.
that are being done now that would require going to the planning commission. But any permanent use
Yes,
designation.
any permanent use on the site would require, the site is zoned PD, planned development, and so it's regulated by the master plan. And both the master plan and the PD zone require approval by the planning commission. So any permanent user will have to come in and go through the planning commission. So if we were to get somebody who wanted to use, say, the tender repair on a permanent basis, that approval would have to go through the planning commission.
It would not go to the city council, however, it would be appealable to the city council. Am I correct?
That's correct,
All right,
yes.
Just to be clear.
But the updates to this master plan will come to council. So the process for this is we'll be meeting with the Rail Yards Advisory Board. Once you guys have reviewed it, and we're planning to come back in August, and if necessary, we'll come back at what's the next one after August? November, December meeting. And then we'll take this to the planning commission, and then from the planning commission, it will come on to full council.
Liba?
I absolutely agree with you. I think it's ridiculous to limit it as it is limited. But I also think it's really vital that we be very careful, that we understand that this is the recreation, we hope, of something like what it was. And I'm very worried that should manufacturing come in or something that is not a public use, is going to be very, very harmful to Albuquerque and to New Mexico and to the world. We are trying to do everything we can to bring tourism and economic development from all over. We get visitors from all over the world. We're trying to bring the steam locomotives. I met with Lawrence a few days ago, and he told me he wants Wheels Museum in the market to be in the machine shop with 29, 26 and other locomotives and other train groups that want to come. And we certainly want that. And we think that will make a major economic driver for Albuquerque. So yes, open. I understand the housing, although I'm not really for housing on the property. I don't think the rail yard is the right place for housing, but I know we have money in it. And have to figure out something clever to do housing. But we want this to be a public place.
Yeah, and there's language in the document, I believe, help me out here, that speaks to that, speaks to maximizing public access to the site. Doesn't say that it should be entirely open to the public, because if some
Mr. Chairman,
business wants to
I
come in.
have to agree with her on the housing situation. If you're gonna put more condos or apartments there, Albuquerque doesn't need them. I drive through downtown, and every time I look around there, condos and apartments. I agree with you, single family housing, yes. And I'm not sure the rail yard is a place for it. I agree with you. Thank you.
I'm gonna go on record saying I disagree because I know that was a big point with workhouse housing. But you know what, I'm sorry, our neighborhood needs more housing. We've lost so much to commercial. We lost South Corrales because of commercial buildings. And that was a big component, and that's one of the reasons that we really went in there. It needs to be, I can understand mixed use. I mean, single family housing as well as live housing is what was originally planned. And we're gonna advocate for that because we need more housing stock in our neighborhood.
Can I ask something? I met with Adele Hunley's on our board, and she's in Borellis, and, she's state legislator, and she's been our friend, all of our friends forever. And when we met with Lawrence the other day, she mentioned that she thought there was a lot of land in Borellis that is available for housing that's not being built. Many lots available. And so she suggests the idea, and I don't know if it's possible or not, that maybe that could be transferred into the neighborhoods more than just on the rail yard. I don't know if that's possible. It was her thought.
Well, I think that discussion is outside of this plan.
Okay.
Yeah, sure, there's vacant sites all over the city that could be housing. But what we're talking about here and what's in the document now, and it's not really on our agenda to remove it entirely from the site because it's a use that's allowed on the site. Our question right now is, where within the site is it appropriate? I think my sense of what the original discussions were about housing was, first of all, we used housing money to buy the site. Secondly, housing, as Jay just said, can be very helpful in the security of the site. Some housing. And I know, Francis, what you're talking about, it sounded like you're describing that we would suddenly start building multi-story apartment buildings on the site. I don't think that is at all what was intended. But there was an expectation that if Second Street and First Street just become a barrier and there's little or no housing on the rail yard site, except maybe even in one corner, which is what Samatar wanted, then there are many fewer eyes on site. And security and vitality of the site really depends on people and not just during the work day, not just during the office hours, not just when Wheels is open or whatever it is, but rather, as you stated, a more 24/7.
Also, I just wanted to comment on what you said about the lots in the neighborhood. There's only 4 lots available that I know to be able to work on. That is actually, I believe, in the purview of the city. All the rest are all private properties. So I have an empty lot. I'm not selling my lot because I don't want another neighbor next to me.
Well,
So,
I'm not advocating for it. She
but
suggested that maybe-
I understand
Yeah.
what you're saying. There is lots there, but people own that and they use it for other uses or they have it for other reasons. And we can't just go in and make them do that.
And I would think that you consider more dense buildings because it's a missed opportunity to get more housing. We all know across the country, there's lack of housing, especially affordable housing. And if we could, there could be throwaway sites on that. I agree with you that you want it to be this public use, absolutely.
Yeah.
But there may be throwaway sites on that would be perfect for this dense little building that you could get maybe 100 units or 50 units, whatever it is. That's just perfect for that corner, wherever it is. And it'd be great to see 1,000 units there, honestly. And the less land that takes up, the better for the other uses. And the more viable those other uses will be, for sure. You look at Santa Fe and their rail yards, it's a cool project.
Yeah.
There's very little housing and it misses it because of that. If it had more housing, that project would be so dynamic and be so much better, in my opinion. And we need housing and we need affordable housing and we need workforce housing. And, if you do less dense, projects, it's a big missed opportunity, in my opinion.
There's also a height restriction.
I saw that, 45 feet, and I think that needs to be,
is purposely, and that's the same in our neighborhood.
yeah,
We do not allow it to go higher because we don't want to lose our beautiful mountainside, you know?
Yeah, I
have-
get
we're
it.
lucky, we're a lucky state or city to have that gorgeous view either way. So,
yeah, there'll be considerations, you know, that fit, make sure that they work for the neighborhood, but some of those buildings have to be over 45 feet. Maybe your views aren't being taken, I don't know.
I believe all the rail yard buildings are 45.
Yeah, so, and historically, you want to fit what makes sense too. So you don't want to do something that's 6 stories that stands out. You don't want these buildings really to be seen ideally. You know, it's the existing structures that are so amazing. Those need to be in the forefront, and anything behind it is in the background.
And we want to stay in the neighborhood, not downtown, like downtown's taken over with all these mega buildings. You can't see anything unless you're up on
I
the
to-
top floors. And
Totally agree with you.
I think this brings up an important point, which is the height limits on this chart
Yes.
and what the consultants are thinking about that. My recollection of that, and let's see, you know, the folks who've been here all along, I think, my recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, was that these height limits were kind of worked out in consideration of the adjacency to the historic buildings, where it's appropriate to go higher and where it's appropriate to stay lower, so that you're not obstructing, you know, the feel of the site. of the
Right.
historic building.
So the heights are listed by parcel. So there are, for example, parcels 9 and 10 are limited to 30 feet. Parcels 1, 2, 3, no, sorry, 2, 3, and 4 are limited to 45 feet. And then the remainders have height limits of 67 feet. These were a translation of the height limitations from the Rella sector plan. And so the heights are limited, they're lower, close to Second Street, and close to the low density residential. They're taller near the bigger structures and the bigger buildings. And then they're very low on Second Street, right at the entrance just north of Santa Fe, because, you know, coming from downtown, you've got that view of the buildings and the sandias, and to make sure that you don't obstruct that view. So we were proposing to translate this as closely as possible from this minus what, if you were to decide that you don't want to keep the 10 parcels, to translate this as closely as possible in just a different format into the master plan. So we weren't proposing any changes to the building heights as established here.
So would that be, you know, because some of them are 67, which I assume that's probably in the vicinity of the heights of
That's
some
the
of
heights of
the
the
largest
biggest
buildings.
buildings, yeah.
And that did translate from the original Barella sector plan of 2006. You know, would one approach be that we just look at those and those, the ones that are all the same, that those could become a parcel, and then that way that's defined? I would ask the consultants on that too.
So in other words, you keep the parcelization
Well,
just for height only.
sort of combine it.
Yeah,
Combine the parcelization based on the heights limits here, because that much we know was derived from the original sector
Right.
plan, which
Right.
preceded the whole rail yards purchase.
You could basically create a height exhibit that would go into the plan that wouldn't necessarily have to be tied
To
to
parcel
parcelization.
Just-
Because when we think about parcelization, we're thinking,
use.
you know, have subdivision
Mhm.
plats and that kind of thing, which become, you know, may not. I don't think that's necessary in order to translate those height restrictions to continue in the plan.
Mhm. Just kind of a cloud over.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
It-
kind- yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it can still be spatially designated on the site as part of the plan, just wouldn't be tied to these parcels necessarily.
I think this brings up an important point, which is, again, historically, Brella had a sector plan for many years. And in 2006, 2007, it was updated and with an expectation that this site would be developed. And there was a lot of attention paid at that time. And that is a standing land use plan in the city of Albuquerque as translated into the current zoning.
Yes, the Bareilles sector plan is translated over to the Bareilles character protection overlay. And so when we're going through this, there are some references still in the master plan to the Bareilles sector plan. And so we'll be going back to that sector plan to make sure that that language is clear in here, because it's in a different format now in some of the character protection overlay. So that's part of the update.
I think that no matter how much planning you put into this, you have to respect the neighborhoods and how they're going to be affected by whatever you do. And I'm sorry, that's why I feel the condos and the apartments that I don't go for. And I'm not against putting them on the rail yard, those kind of things, because then you start changing our neighborhoods a lot. You have condos on Broadway that should have never been built. And so I'm just throwing that in, because I see so many condos and apartments in Albuquerque, and they are not priced for people of low income, and we all know that. So that's just another joke that it's going to be affordable. Thank you.
I don't know if there's any low income anymore in our neighborhood.
The requirement is that 30 dwelling units minimum, and that's all it says right now. Would have to be affordable.
How do you feel about affordable product that's actually dictated by the LITC kind of rules? So
Wow, you know what? We worked pretty much close to that time when we were developing the BCC. We went out and did our research on trust. And we did work with Sawmill on doing a project on 7th and Iron. And it's worked out great. I've only seen one house come up for sale, and that's just recently. From the time that we did it, which was about 2009. That they're nice neighbors. They keep the place up clean, and I love it. I mean, I think it's a great thing because like I said, our prices in our neighborhood have gone sky high. It's the same thing when it first, the rail yard development came up, prices tripled in our neighborhood.
right.
For houses that couldn't, I'm seeing people getting bought out that could not afford to stay there anymore because of the price of the taxes and such. So, I mean, it's like crazy. Now there's a lot that there was a house on it, a small house that they knocked down, and he's trying to build 7 units on this small little lot, which is kind of, to me, it was outrageous. I think he was trying to go through stories, and I'm not sure if it passed or not. I know I suggested that we do send in that letter saying we disagree with that, because there still have to be working on that height restriction. But to put 7 units on a lot that's smaller than most lots, because our lots are very narrow, is ridiculous.
How do you feel about, ownership versus apartments and like middle?
Well, I think it needs to be a mix.
Yeah.
Because we do have a lot of, we had a lot of elderly people that had passed away, and the family didn't want to move back. So they rent out their apartments, and, and there's a lot of people that have lived there all their life renting, as long as it's affordable.
Counselor, what's the way to protect the taxes for not going up from people around there? If this project ever comes to fruition and it becomes this wonderful area to live in because you have these great mixed uses and it's walkable.
Yeah.
What can we do to protect everyone in that area where they can keep their taxes not skyrocketing?
So the tax question is primarily the county property tax assessment and their system, but also the state. So the state has passed exemptions, for instance, for veterans and elderly, I believe. I know that they did one for veterans. So those were property tax limits for certain individuals who testify. But Miguel might be able to. He was probably around when some of that was done. Can you speak to that, Representative?
I believe they can freeze your taxes if you earn under 2,500. Am I right? 25,000 a year, if you make less than 25,000 a year, your taxes are frozen, so they don't go up 3% every year like ours do. That's no different.
You know, I sponsored a couple of pieces of legislation early on, 2000, 2003. The problem that we were having in terms of freezing or exempting low income from property tax. It just brought about too much opposition. So what we did is we kind of took a step back and I pursued two pieces of legislation. One was property tax valuation freeze for the elderly 65 and over based on income. And we started off at I guess about 15,000, and now we've upped that to pretty much about 28,000. So that's kind of a safety net. And mainly the reason that I did that is to kind of avoid the gentrification of our traditional Hispanic communities. And we see a lot of that gentrification in Taos, Santa Fe, some starting to kind of develop in Las Vegas, North Valley. I mean, we have no concept of traditional Hispanic community in the North Valley anymore, mainly because of that type of gentrification. But the North Valley was traditional Hispanic community, just like we still have here. South Broadway, Barelas, Atrisco, Pajarito, Los Padillas, in the basin down here. So that was one aspect that we did. And naturally, the main reason was the gentrification, where we saw overnight houses coming into these traditional Hispanic communities, multi-million-dollar houses. So then the consequences of that was that here's grandma and grandpa who have been living in this household for 200 years, all of a sudden saw 1,000% increase in their property tax. That's the killer. Is that people can't afford to stay in their houses because of the property tax. So the freeze actually, it's not a freeze on the tax, it's a freeze on the valuation. It freezes the valuation. So if you're paying $800 in property taxes for a piece of property, for your residential property, and the valuation naturally will go up, but the property tax will stay pretty stable. You know, but the valuation, the valuation will be frozen, but the property tax will still incrementally grow a little bit, but not in terms of spikes like 1,000% or even 100% or even 50%. Now the other one that we did in 2000 for the elderly, the other one was disabled. And again, it's a disability based on federal criteria. You know, so it's not like, you know, you busted a finger and now you're disabled, right? No, it's got to meet federal criteria in terms of what disability means. So that one, again, we tied it to income. And those have worked really well, because for those populations, they don't have to worry about those high spikes in increases in property tax. It's the younger generation, you know, that's still going to get hammered, right, to some degree. But these populations are pretty kind of protected in that sense. And I'm still trying to do this exemption on property taxes, but for the elderly, but it's just not a go. it'll be a difficult track to accomplish in the legislature. So we're gonna have to kind of stay the course with these valuation freezes for some time to come.
What if we talked about this? We've been talking about this for years, about how to figure out how to do something like that. And we thought maybe doing a protection overlay zone on property taxes of homeowners that have, that have been there at a certain point on or back and stuff. Is that something that could be feasible?
What happens with these property tax issues is that we get into what's called the equal protection clause. And then you can't benefit a class if it kind of brings about negative consequences on the other class.
Right.
And I'm not just talking about like working class and middle class and higher income, I'm talking about just classes of people. And in this case, you're identifying a class of people
Mhm.
that has historically lived in this area, and you're granting them exemption. So that's the problem we have with these property taxes, is that we can't find ourselves in this equal protection clause that basically makes it unconstitutional for us to do that. And that's why the valuation freeze kind of works well, because we're tying it to a fixated type of criteria, in this case, income and age and income and disability, and what you're saying is kind of like real exclusive. It'd be difficult, I think.
So this is a really valuable discussion, but we're kind of going off of the site here.
Yeah.
But yeah, without question, a healthy community has a healthy mix of incomes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And same thing goes for an affordable housing, new affordable housing. That mixed income really is a healthy mix. And that would be everywhere from 30% of median income up to market rate. But again, the requirement is on the site is for 30 permanently affordable dwelling units. That's a very low number of dwelling units, and probably could not be financed without a project of at least double that number. Would be my guess under low-income housing tax credits. But so housing is allowed on the site. It will be allowed on the site. The question is this parcelization. And again, going back to Jay's point, having the most flexible mix of uses on the site is probably going to give us the best opportunity to start to see some outside investment. It's not just public investment. So that's one of the many uses we have to discuss today. But let's try to get back onto the discussion and get back to the consultants to discuss how we want to.
So if I might just try to conclude with this part of the discussion, because we've got a number of others. It sounds like that there is some support for being more flexible in terms of uses, but that it's also important to keep that height restriction that was in the original plan, that was carried over from the Barella sector plan. And so is that correct? Am I hearing it correctly?
That's right.
All right. Great.
Also, I do have one other question.
Yeah.
So all these existing historical resources that are to be preserved, those will still be in effect, right?
Yes.
Yeah, there are no plans to change any of the historic resources that are listed on the site plan. The city is in an MOU, a memorandum of understanding with the State Historic Preservation Office. And so key components of that of memorandum of understanding is which buildings are going to be preserved, which buildings can be removed. Any buildings, if they are to be removed, have to be documented. So for example, when the sheet metal shed was removed and the north washroom at the north end of the site, those were already listed in the master plan as being eligible to be removed because of the condition that they were in. And there are two of a total of 4 on the site that are allowed to be removed, not required, but allowed. Even though they're allowed to be removed, the planning department, when they were getting ready to remove those, had to fully document them and with the State Historic Preservation Office and talk about what things they were going to keep. And so, for example, from the sheet metal shed, the rails were kept that had the sheet metal that was on the roof. They kept some of the lumber pieces, I believe, as well. They fully documented the buildings as well before they were removed from the site.
So those 2 of the 4
That's
have
2 of
been
the 4.
removed,
Yes.
and there are 2 more that are eligible. Which are those?
But there are 2 more that are eligible. One is right down at the very south end. It doesn't have a name on here, but it's a garage. It's south of Wheels, and it's just before the southern fence line. It's got a very, very big crack in it. And it's a small brick garage. And then the other one is at the north end, and it's the paint shop, I believe. And that one, as far as I know, at this point, there's no interest in removing it, and it's not got any structural issues, but there was concern that it was in an area where there was interest in access, and it didn't have a lot of,
That's the northernmost building,
it's the
north
northernmost
of the
building.
fire station.
Yes, north of the fire station, and I think it's.
You don't need the pattern shop, do you?
Okay, so let's move on past that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the historic resources are very well protected and require the State Historic Preservation Officer to be involved in anything like that.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
in regards to Samatar, my understanding is that they also had developed an environmental remediation plan or dwelled on that to some degree. I wonder if those elements are going by the wayside, or is the updated master plan going to be inclusive of some of those elements that went into the master plan?
Right, so I think one of the bullets on the previous slide that talked about the intent of this update was recognizing that there have been additional studies, additional work that has come forward since the original master plan. And so we're going to incorporate those by reference and provide summaries of those into this updated document so that we make sure that we're connecting those dots. It's a very important point. Thank you.
And unfortunately, Alan's just, I think has
Just stepped
left. But the remediation plan, it was started with Samatar, but the city actually concluded it. And we are in some sort of similar to an MOU, but I'm a little bit less familiar with it, but with the State Environmental Health Department on the remediation of the site. And so that work is ongoing, and some of that is the work that's occurred on the north end that the updated site plan will show. So for example, there were some areas of contamination at the north end, and the work for the parking area and the North Plaza was part of that remediation work for that northern end. So that remediation plan is still in effect and will continue to be something that the city continues to work on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are we ready to turn the slide?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, So dovetailing right into housing. So as Counselor mentioned, we have a minimum number of dwelling units of 30. And our question for the group is, should there be a maximum number?
We got one vote for no on that. Any other?
I think there should be a maximum.
So how would we determine that? Okay, let's hear
Oh,
from
oh,
Senator
good,
TC
good,
Pino.
good, good.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I mean, I think once again, the issue here is maintain maximum flexibility. And to predetermine what we wouldn't do, I think is in the long run going to tie hands that we might wish we hadn't tied later on. The state is putting a great deal of money into affordable housing and trying to spark the creation of more housing units. So I think, you know, the maximum flexibility is a principle that we ought to apply here as well. And I don't think we ought to try to say, well, no more than whatever it would be, 50 or 100 or whatever. Let's make sure that we don't limit future uses that might be really practical and that may be easily funded. That state affordable housing money is going to spark a considerable amount of investment around the state. And this is a site that ought to take advantage of it as well.
Did everybody get that?
Yeah.
Senator, we had the speaker on low at the very beginning, but I think we got the intent of what you're saying. Thank you. Other discussion on this maximum number idea. There was no maximum previously.
No.
So why would we be putting a maximum on that?
We wanted to see, so when we were thinking about the different approaches, one option was to allow all uses everywhere, but only certain uses in certain areas. And so the question was, what we wanted to prompt with that question was, should there be, is housing something that could be unlimited throughout the site, or should there be some sorts of limitations? And so that's what we were trying to prompt with that question about a number. And maybe, so our next question was, so if we're not limiting by number, should we limit by location? Are there parts of the site where housing maybe isn't appropriate?
Well, what petrifies me is we're talking about the most iconic, important place in New Mexico and maybe in America for my money, which is a rail heritage site. And to just give it free rein to make it into a housing site is unbelievable to me. As much as I love you, and I know you're thinking 1,000 units, because you just said 1,000 units, and I do love you, and I know what you have in mind. To take up the space that should be used for, I think, excursions and rail and museums and educational programs and things for the public, and build 1,000 units or somewhere on this small site, really. Now, Lawrence did talk about buying the property to the south.
I agree. I do agree with you. And
Okay.
I'm not saying you put housing everywhere, but I'm just saying, don't restrict it. Give yourself as much flexibility. And let's say 10 years from now, nothing happens because you can't develop those. But there's the ability to do housing somewhere, and you want to move it forward. You're just going to give yourself more flexibility. But the buildings you're talking about should be protected and should be for public use, in my opinion.
And there's not
there's-
much
there's-
land. Is there, where would you put it?
Who knows? But until a master plan's developed and you see it and you see how all the pieces work together, it could be great to have housing in certain locations. And I'm just saying, from flexibility standpoint, give the site as much flexibility for it to grow and, ebb and flow, because it will.
I agree with the flexibility in the realm of the purpose of why are we doing it on this site and not any old place in Albuquerque where anything could
I
be
think you're
built.
doing it both.
Well, maybe if we can do something real
Well,
innovative, I'll.
Leave it, I mean, we recognize that your perspective is that this is a historic rail site. And if the whole place were to become a historic rail museum, that would probably suit you fine. In the same sense, Jay, if
Well-
1,000 units were built scattered around that site in a sensitive way, that would be fine from his perspective. The point is, my point is, each of us has a certain vision. I have my own. I
Mhm.
try to not talk about it much because I'm in a position where I shouldn't be saying just what I think should be happening on site. But we each have a vision of what it could be. And that applies to probably everybody who's ever seen that site because it's inspirational place.
Yeah.
But sitting here today, we are 15 years down
I
the
know,
road.
I get it. We haven't
And
done the
we've done
housing
some,
either.
and there's been progress. I don't want to
Yeah.
deny. I mean, we have new roofs on
Yeah.
I mean, multi-million-dollar roofs to protect some of these buildings, and we have more of that kind of work to do. And I commend everyone who's both primarily this administration has been very supportive of the rail yards as far as the preservation and building the plaza and the remediation that's occurred on the north. There's been progress, but that's all been public dollars. And I think the vision of the master plan was it would be open to private investment and private dollars. And without that, in our lifetime, we'll never see it restored or become a vital place. So, I mean, we've got to keep that open. You know, that's the one thing I would say is, you know, I mean, I'm a housing guy and I'm a historic preservation guy. Those are two of the things I care the most about as my career, right? But at the same time, this is an absolutely unique place. I've
Yeah.
seen buildings where I've seen projects that I can't remember where, I believe where buildings were built within buildings, right?
Yes.
The giant building, you know, that does that have to remain looking exactly like an industrial facility, which is what it was, an industrial facility, the machine shop? Or could you build something within there? It might be housing, it might be retail, it might be cultural, but that you would make a more complete use of these buildings and it would have to be done very carefully and sensitively designed.
And I was just gonna talk about the flip side of our question and going back to Counselor, what you were saying in the beginning, that 30 units is really difficult. You probably won't get financing.
No.
And so does it make sense to raise the minimum?
Well, I think that 30 again was a direct calculation based on the money that was
Yeah.
put in.
Yeah.
And that was a calculation based on new construction, the cost of new construction, which it would be the equivalent of that or even more expensive. But I think it was also, that number was placed because we know that workforce housing can be built as part of a mixed income project. And that there are ways to do that within low-income housing tax credits and even with the regular market. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jay. You're right. You're right. So what about the question of, I mean, I always thought, well, a specific location where housing would most likely not go might be right up against the track, the main
Yeah.
line.
Oh, exactly.
But then I caught myself and I said,
Yeah.
well, One Central was just built right next to the rail line on Central Avenue. At the rail, you know, directly north of the station. There are ways to build things that would mitigate rail noise, and the fact is, we don't have the number of vehicles going through there that we used to.
Are there structures that housing shouldn't go into? The master plan right now allows housing in parcel 2, so that's the very south end. Parcel 3, which is the storehouse. So, you know, if Wheels were to move into the machine shop, then you could have, according to the master plan right now, you could have live work in the storehouse. And then in parcel 9, which is the northern end along Second Street. Those are the only places housing can be located. So for example, if somebody were to do something creative inside the blacksmith shop or the boiler shop, right now you couldn't do housing in those. I don't know that there are people banging down the door to try and do that. It seems
Well,
quite challenging, but
yeah, I
is
mean, I
that
think
something that we should open up?
to me, the mental framework that we have to have on this is we don't know. We don't know what good idea somebody might bring or bad idea, right? Which, by the way, if there's a bad idea, Francis, that's not consistent, then that's going to the planning commission. There's a public process to have to, I mean, this master plan, which is sort of a difficult name because it sounds like, oh, we're planning the whole thing out. It's really a site development plan. Correct me if I'm wrong, consultants, because
Yeah, that's correct.
it's really a site development plan that provides broad parameters and hopefully, and I think it does have broad protections and it should have broad protections, but broad parameters for development. And the fact that Samatar was not interested in or just wanted to do their program, which was mostly office and retail activity, constrains the site presently.
Yeah.
So that's why this question that they brought up in the first place is, should we just list all these uses and say, these are uses that previously have been already approved for the site? And not get focused on, well, should this thing not be next to that or that? Because we don't even know what's going to be next to each other until there's an actual development proposed.
You know, just to kind of go over that, I remember seeing a plan that happened that was I think it was a mall that went under, and a developer came in and redeveloped it into housing apartments. And I could see something like that maybe in the board of the shop with that. But again, I think if a plan like that came up, it would get caught one in the RFP and then when it goes to planning. So I think we're kind of protected in that. And that's a possibility, like you said, building a building in the building. It also could stand for retail like that too.
Yeah, and those kind of places are appealing to people because you still see the structure and you're still inside this amazing thing.
So I
but it
don't
has
think we
something
need
to
to
it.
totally limit it, but we do need to keep the, like you said, the historical part of it in there.
And I'll also add that a lot of the components of the discussion that you guys have all had today are reflected in the goals and policies section, which we're not touching. There is, for example, goal 2.1, a mix of housing types will be available in the rail yards. You guys have all talked about that this morning. Goal 3.1, the public will feel welcome at the rail yards. We've talked about that a lot. Goal Goal 4.1, the rail yards will become a model for mixed-use development. And then goal 6.1, the rail yards will be home to a quality museum. That's a key thing, and it's so all of the policy guidance about striking a balance on how the site is truly mixed, how it becomes vibrant, how we protect the neighborhoods. They're all encapsulated within the goals and policies section, and any application, because it'll be going to the planning commission, it's a policy decision. They'll be looking at how is that site plan request, how is the for example, somebody wanting to do houses inside the boiler shop, how is that furthering the goals and policies of the master plan or not? Yeah, I mean, are they not allowing access to that portion of the site? Oh, I know the other policy that I wanted to mention. What is it? It's Policy 3.12, maintain a balance between private and public access to the machine shop. Machine shop is guaranteed public access. So even if at some point a proposal came forward, let's say somebody, before we were able to get the machine shop up and running for the wheels, as Lawrence has talked about, let's say somebody came forward with a proposal for, was it wind turbines at one time? Wind
Yeah,
turbines in the
Got rid of that
machine shop.
deal.
And they wanted to do wind turbines in there, zero public access,
Yeah.
nobody could get in. They wouldn't be able to do that
It's only about
because we are requiring that there is public access to the machine shop. So there are a lot of protections built into the goals and policy section, which,
And that is consistent with the way all our land use plans in the city and county, they spell out a lot of these general parameters and policies, and then any applicant has to come in and speak
And
to
speak.
each of those when they apply.
It's good.
Ready to move on?
Yeah.
Okay, Great.
Okay, the turntable and in general, the south area, which not a lot has happened in that part of the site. We wanted to ask, how should the turntable function? Should the connection to the main line stay in place? What land uses should go around the turntable and within the south area?
Okay.
Leva?
Guess what? We have representatives here from our partners from 2926 who have spent 15 years and $3.5 million approximately getting that locomotive ready. It has to come home by contract. It has to come home, which is the rail yards. It cannot come home unless we have the turntable. The turntable is the heart and soul of this property, along with these historic buildings. So to me, it is very obvious that the turntable has got to be functioning. It's got to have the connection to the main line, and it's got to have land around it for itself and for other locomotives and train cars. There's not a lot of land there. There's really in my opinion, between wheels and the turntable, not a heck of a lot of land. That has got to be used for rail. I don't see any other possible thing to do there.
I'll make an exception and open up to the
Okay,
audience,
good,
and
thank you.
and let's hear from
Go ahead,
2926
go
on
ahead.
that point.
My name is John Roberts, Mexico Steam Locomotive and Railroad Historical Society. Thank you. Yeah, we have obviously a vested interest to be, for our locomotive number 2926 to be at the rail yards. We need the turntable to make that happen. That area provides us a safe, appropriate place for public display, for potential excursion operations, a whole host of activities, along with the possibility of other entities within the nation to come and join us. We have some letters of intent from people like this to expand on that facility for rail heritage use. Rail heritage and rail tourism is very big, very popular in the nation. So this makes it a very appropriate use for that area, historic, cultural, leading into museums, like was mentioned already, cultural activities, public use, open spaces, kids areas, etc. So that's our vested interest in it. We certainly need it for that to happen. So the turntable to operate and to be connected to the main line for us is critical.
So your present site, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you've always seen that as an interim site. Of course, is an important place for you to rebuild the locomotive.
Right.
But I understand it has its limitations in terms of a public facility.
Yeah, as far as size and public participation limitations, especially if we are steamed up for whatever reason, right? We have regulations requiring us to keep people at a certain distance. The rail yards and the turntable will allow us to get more people in that same in that area if we're doing that sort of activity. So yeah, and our present site, our restoration site, has been very useful for what we've been doing with it, but we are outgrowing that as far as public display goes. We can still keep it as a restoration site, that's not an issue, or in long term, we can move ourselves over to the rail yards and keep our restoration operations off in that area.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, when you look at the parcelization, the old one, it does, this parcel in that area is listed as railroad related facilities.
So between railroad related and cultural and museum.
Right.
And economic development and everything else. Yeah.
And I think that was anticipated in the previous plan.
It was, yes. Part of the reason we were asking about that is that parcel number 1 that includes the turntable is very big. It's almost all of the southern portion of the site. And so there are portions where the footprint of the original roundhouse is drawn out for potential reconstruction or well, rebuilding, because there's nothing but the foundations now. But it also includes a large area that is quite a distance clear of the railroad lines that previously had the easement on them that go all the way up to the south platform. And so what we were wanting some direction on is that, you know, that's listed as parking only in the master plan, but are there other uses that we would anticipate maybe in that area where, you know, if you imagine, let's say, the roundhouse or a portion of the roundhouse were rebuilt maybe as a location for 29-26, and the turntable is functioning and the rail lines and necessary safety areas are clear, there'd still be land left over. And would we want parking there? Would we want to allow retail uses? Would we want to allow housing? You know, what are the other thoughts for that portion of the site?
Well, isn't that question? I know what you're asking, and the idea that it's only these things plus parking is sort of strange, but do we want to, outside of recognizing these special uses that we would want to allow there, isn't it the converse of the question that the rest of the site is probably not anticipated, or at least for rail related uses? I mean, outside of a museum, of course, but the actual rail operations would be limited to this area. But then, I mean, I wonder
Exactly.
whether it shouldn't just say, remove this thing about parking. I think parking next to a really historic asset like the turntable seems sort of incongruous to me. But I mean, maybe there's a place for it, but we shouldn't be ruling out other uses as opposed to.
It seems like based on, you know, our initial conversation about allowing kind of maximum flexibility about uses, but then as it relates to this particular portion of the rail
That's a good
yards,
point.
I think maybe we need to just make sure that it's very clear the importance of the turntable and the functioning of that, the access to the main line, and make sure that we capture those things and not necessarily constrain ourselves to what someone might think about for other areas around that. So it's kind of trying to blend our conversation with the initial land use flexibility and the importance of this particular area that needs to be maintained, and sort of making sure we're covering both sides of that. Does that make sense to people?
You're both 100% right.
Yeah.
And I think we started out trying to be real liberal and free about this, but it's true. You can't take the heart out and hope the rest is going to work. This is going to, in my opinion, this is the heart of this. And it's not that big. When we start putting our train cars, we got money from the legislature this year to repair track. And when we start putting train cars there and start doing excursions, and we're working with the Santa Fe group, you know, doing that, and we've released the train car to them. And we have another locomotive that's, as he says, a letter of interest that wants to come here. We have magnificent exhibits that will draw, I think, hundreds of thousands of people a year to Albuquerque to see these very, very rare locomotives and train cars, and do excursions and exhibits and museum work. So to me, I know you think it's big, but to me, it's very, very small. So we need that. Yeah.
I mean, I think historically, the roundhouse and the turntable were a hugely critical piece of the
absolutely.
site.
Absolutely.
And then from there, of course, cars and engines and
Yeah.
were distributed throughout the site from that point. So if we look at the site today, if we're protecting that turntable and we're protecting that area, we're not protecting or setting aside that area, but saying that it's all appropriate for rail type use,
Yeah, absolutely.
then we haven't precluded any of what you just described.
Right.
But we're trying to, in general on the plan, not get down to detail of saying, well, it's going to be just like this, but rather saying that that is all allowable on the site. So I think that's, trying to get back to that idea that we don't limit ourselves, as the senator was saying, that we don't limit ourselves to by trying to preconceive
Mhm.
what any specific proposal can be for the site.
Question on that. So these cars that would go in, are they gonna park, the trains that come in, are they gonna be permanently parked there? Is there gonna be,
It could be both. It could be parked as exhibits or do excursions from the rail yard, just as there are trains now.
and how many cars would you plan to park?
Well,
there?
one of the museums that wants to come to Albuquerque has about 6 cars.
That's a lot. That's a lot of noise coming into the neighborhoods. I think something also, I mean, I'm not against it. I just think that there needs to be some buffer of sound around that.
Senator TC Pino wants to weigh in again.
Yeah, a couple of points, Mr. Chairman, to bring up. Does the turntable need work in order to be able to function, or is it fully functioning now? And if so, where would that, who would undertake to fix it and make it workable?
I believe it is functioning because although the easement with the BNSF is terminated, BNSF are still using it. And so I believe it is still functional.
So they use it currently. Oh, I didn't realize that. That's good.
Yeah, up until recently, Senator, they actually had an easement to that, and they don't have that anymore, but they're still being allowed to use it. Our friends from the Locomotive Society can maybe shed a little bit more light.
We have done some looking at it. From what we understand, the last time it was really used was when Railroad brought their equipment in. There has been signs that maybe has been used at other times, but nobody quite remembers it. It would have to be checked out to make sure that it can handle it. Probably new ties. I know that the engine that runs it and turns it around and so forth has been vandalized. But I think these things are solvable.
Yeah.
And necessary. I just wanted to make one other comment, is that our engine is not going to go down there and be a static display, because we want it moving, and I think the public wants it moving. And this is a perfect spot for us to demonstrate what railroading was all about in early times in New Mexico.
And I mean, the type of activity, to address Dorothy's question, it would be sporadic. It wouldn't be going on, daily, that these cars or the engine would be moved around. Or
These cars, some of them are very historic and well maintained, and they would be open for people to see who would be interested in paying a price to see.
Right.
And also, the car owners would be obliged to pay to be stored here, which would be an income stream for the city.
Did that answer your question, Senator?
Yes, one other point I wanted to bring up. Leva had earlier mentioned the possibility of securing additional land from the railroad south of this property, would in any way that either be affected by or affect the decision of how do we use the turntable? Does using the turntable and maintaining the connection to the main line chop the property up in a way that would make it difficult to connect the two parcels?
I would ask the consultants, I'm hearing no from the Locomotive Society.
Yeah.
I think we've always had our eye on the city, speaking for the city, I think we've always had our eye on that land that's presently a very sporadically used rail yard still. That immediate land directly south of the site. There's another rail yard south of the site closer to the main line. We're not talking about that, but the land going down to Cesar Chavez Boulevard, it is always kind of been something that people have been interested in, and it's sort of like a leftover. It wasn't available to us at the time that we bought this site, but it's always been something that a potential developer might want to buy it and have it help their project.
I think it can be. The issues associated with it that the senator brought up can be addressed if it is acquired.
Right.
Could be incorporated.
All right. Thanks, Senator. Anything else right now?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, on the turntable, are we looking at the city kind of or needing the effort to make that a fully functional space in terms of not only the turntable, but these other elements with these locomotives? I mean, why are we waiting? Now, that's my question. Why are we waiting to in terms of not fully developing the turntable and and also the other elements that go with that, which is some of the contributions that these historic locomotives will bring to that area? I mean, does the city not have a coordinator that's working with all these elements, you know?
Wonderful question.
Well,
Or,
yeah, I mean, I think that's an excellent question, and I really agree with us getting an answer to that question. I think the city, this administration, I don't want to speak for the administration, and they're not represented here today, but they have shown a commitment to the site itself. And I think providing some clarity within this plan will help
Okay.
the administration and help the potential partners down on that end of the site to come up with a proposal that's a public-private nonprofit proposal to do exactly what you say, to begin to identify the needs of the turntable and identify what the possibilities are down there. And the nonprofit world is no different from anyone else, that they could come to the city with a development proposal for this specific part of the site.
thank
Wonderful.
you, Greg,
Thank
for that.
Great question.
Yeah, it sure is.
I think we can move on.
We're getting close.
Okay, so we also wanted to talk about interim land uses. And we listed some of the ones we talked about earlier. I wanted to know, how long should they be allowed? Should there be any limit whatsoever? Any restrictions? What kind of interim uses?
So correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no discussion of interim uses in the plan right now.
No, that's correct.
But this is an important question because we know that there are interim uses already going on. And we've identified those, and they have been identified in the past because we know that they're successful activities. One important one is the rail yards market. The rail yards market is something that everyone has acknowledged is beneficial to the site, that it's appropriate for the site. But we also acknowledge that it's something that's somewhat movable, that it doesn't necessarily have to stay exactly where it is today, and that some days are bigger than others, and the winter market is huge and really expands, and then other times, it may require less space, but and that it's in an important historic building now, but it doesn't have any ownership on that. Speaking of the market, but that's a really important interim use that we need to recognize and have a place for. In the same sense, or in a similar sense, this place has always been a really compelling site for filming. I mean, now a lot of that attraction is that it's a dystopian looking place because it's so funky that people, will do a science fiction movie there, right? But so that, it might turn to a different kind of filmmaking, but it's still, in the interim, it's a compelling place. And in fact, the city has been collecting money from a studio this year for part of the site, for much of the site to film. So those are two that we know of. A festival that's outside of filming. A festival will be conducted there in the short term before there's a building in use, but the building might be safe enough to do that. Something like the boiler shop, which has recently been fixed up, and the tender repair shop that have the new roofs on them. There have been people proposing putting on a big art show of large scale sculpture or whatever it is, that you bring it in. It's maybe only open during the daytime because we don't have a lot of lighting in there, but then it's an appropriate interim use. And if the fire marshal says it's okay, then we could do it. So why don't you take it from there, consultants, and you've got the question up there. Should we be defining time limits on these? And should there be any other restrictions on these interim or temporary uses?
So I think this is also one of those spectrum issues where, kind of like with land uses, is the sense that, allowing flexibility and recognizing that these uses are, I think, as has been demonstrated by the market, are important to getting people to the site, exposure, all those things. And right now, as we've noted, the master plan is silent on those things. If the goal is of this group is to allow that flexibility, then it's probably appropriate that we add a discussion about those uses and the allowance of those, based on the earlier conversation about land uses and maintaining flexibility. Maybe that's the strategy, is to be flexible with those uses, as you say. And it's come up several times in this conversation. We really don't know what someone might come forward with. We know about the market, we know about the film, and we've heard, interest about this kind of large scale art project. But maybe there's a festival, maybe a dystopian, zombie festival.
We get requests constantly. We get requests constantly for national car shows and all kinds of constant requests for the boiler shop to use. Constant.
Yeah, so car show is another example
Yeah.
that's been talked about in the past, that, a big wide open building with a nice new floor and a roof on it.
Yeah, national,
Sort of the
all kinds of
perfect-
shows. Yeah.
I guess the only concern we have in South Broadway is the noise level.
Yeah,
Decent noise level is all.
and that's an important point, right? Because the blacksmith shop had been rented out for quinceañeras and weddings and things like that, where music has been allowed and it's gotten out of control. So these are things that are often, or I think intended to be addressed by a special use permit. Isn't that what it's called, or special event permit?
Yeah.
Special event.
And so that's somewhat land use related, but it's more operations related of like, what time do you have to shut it down? What's the decibel level of any amplified music, et cetera, et cetera. And what's your emergency evacuation plan and things like that.
So in terms of the interim uses, the special events permit is kind of the current permitting process for the site. And I believe the special events permits outside of filming are limited to the blacksmith shop and the North Plaza area. But now that the boiler shop and the tender repair are in a condition that the public can go into, and the flue shop has a certificate of occupancy, we're probably going to start to see a lot more interest, like we mentioned, for car shows and other uses for all of that northern portion where the public can safely enter. Not the machine shop yet, obviously, because the roof isn't quite safe enough, but
And would that still then require the special event permit process?
I think that's how it's handled currently, is cultural services does a special events permit, but that's, I believe, how the market is a special events permit.
Yeah.
So in
that's-
other words, with the permits, if there's an issue with the neighborhood could possibly go to the city and say, can you have them change amplified music from 10 to 9? So it can protect the neighborhood, but still allow the flexibility for events to continue.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true, but my experience has been that it's hard sometimes to control what goes on. And then the flip side of it is it's a pretty rigorous process to have to get these special events. I mean, for somebody like the Rail Yards Market to have to go every time to get that special event is sort of absurd.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's something within this plan where we could write it in that there's a different approach to special events here, but that still has some of the critical protections for just safety and general public health and welfare, like the noise issue.
Right. Maybe we could look at
Yeah.
it, maybe as a suggestion would be to look at that special event process and the things that they deal with, and see if we could just incorporate that directly into the land use component of the master plan that would sort of allow that and set those parameters that are critical to the adjacent neighborhoods right in the document. I don't know if that makes, haven't really looked at it yet, but that might be an approach.
I know we haven't really talked about it much with your scope of work, but I think in the end, it might be really beneficial to people like the market to have a more streamlined approach, but also have some very hard set rules as far as the neighborhood protection.
Also, too, remember, you might have a decimal of 9, allowable 9, but those buildings echo. So it could also amplify that 9 to a 12 or something like that. So I think those things need to kind of be looked at when they get those special permits and maybe lower the decimal.
Is this something where we want to have a list, just like the list you started with there? We add the car shows or something like that, or is this something where it's just
I
unrestricted?
sort of think it helps to have a list, and then you can say, if it's a use that comes up that isn't on the list, that it would have to be approved by the city.
That might
The
work.
permit or something like that, but I think having something in there gives the reader some idea of what we were thinking. Would be appropriate.
And some of these are already incorporated in the IDO as temporary uses.
Okay.
So we can look at that. I also agree. I think that having a list would be helpful.
Any other discussion on this slide?
I also think, we don't know when they're gonna actually develop a place, so I think they should be able to use that place up until,
Mhm.
contract signed or
Right,
something
right,
like that.
Yeah,
And somebody's
yeah,
moved
that's
in,
right.
because if it brings in funding to help the site,
Right.
Sure.
better.
Interest, sure, absolutely.
Their temporary use could be 10 years. Could be 20 years.
Well.
Well, it already
but that's
has
what I'm
been.
saying.
How long?
Yeah,
We already know
yeah,
that.
yeah, goes in.
Yeah. We
You're
already know
exactly
that.
right.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think
we
your
sure do.
comment's a valid one.
Well, that's the nature of the site. I mean, again, we should all live so long, right? To see the whole
Exactly.
thing
All
happen.
live so long.
But at the same
All
time,
live so long.
but
That's what Ron used to say, I'll never see it developed.
at the same time, yeah, it's a compelling place and
Yeah,
just going to the market and seeing people peeking into the other buildings, it's like, that really has opened it up to
Yeah.
the
that's
population of
good.
Albuquerque to see what's there.
The noise may not matter because we won't be able to hear it. We'll be so.
exactly. Point, you got a point.
Senator Ortiz Pino.
Well, yeah, just one quick addition to the discussion, Mr. Chairman. The only thing I would say is that we'd be clear that any agreements for the temporary use be limited to more than a year at a time, year to year basis, that we not sign anything longer than year to year with any of the temporary users.
That's a pretty good point, although I see folks from the market shaking their heads. I think they feel like they've proven themselves, but
No,
But-
there's no doubt they've proven themselves. The problem is, at what point does interim begin interfering with long-term? And that's the issue.
exactly.
Maybe 2 years, maybe you say 2 years to give maximum opportunity to find an alternate site if somebody comes up with something that would require their relocation. But for the foreseeable future, I think, giving them either a 1 or 2 year maximum agreement each time renewable gives us maximum protection for the future.
I think that you're making a good point. And I think that again, as long as most of the building, or most of the buildings are empty presently,
Yeah.
there's still flexibility for a use to move around on the site. But if it's proving to be an impediment to a development that's anticipated, then that's a reason to have to renew. Or if it's becoming an aggravation of some sort and not really working out, then I'm not talking about the market here, that we would want to revisit it on a regular basis.
Mhm. Yes.
Okay. Any other discussion on interim uses?
I also think that there should be one restriction is that it shouldn't be, shouldn't cause any pollution or any harmful things like that. Say a car show, cars are gonna rev their engines and stuff, and that would cause that. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration, especially if you're inside a building.
Yeah, with some of those
Well,
mufflers that they have.
Even with the windows up, it's still, it's-
What'd you say?
A coal-fired train. Then can you do that?
Inside a building, you mean?
No, just
wait.
have if you had coal-fired trains come in and out, would you do that or just be steam?
Oh, it would be diesel powered or something like that.
Yeah.
Ours is oil.
Yeah.
Fired, but they are loud.
Yeah.
That's
Mhm.
part of being a locomotive.
Right.
On a real site.
I think it was the last one. All right.
Perfect, right?
Right
Oh,
on.
that's it.
So we will be coming back to the board for the August meeting, which is on Diane, August.
Just a moment, first Wednesday. August the 3rd.
So we'll be coming back to meet with you guys on August 3rd to kind of reflect on everything we've heard today, and we've got a lot of work to do over the next couple months. And so please feel free to reach out to us with any questions and concerns about any of this. But all available.
So I did say at the beginning, we'd allow any public comment besides, we heard from the Locomotive Society. Is there any other public comment at this time? All right, Alaska.
Mr. Chair, you're looking right at me. The really market, we're curious how market moves or how a project moves beyond interim use into permanent use, say a permanent market with food manufacturing and food distribution, food hall on site, how you move beyond the interim use into even a temporary short-term lease.
So I think the first question in Alaska, if I could paraphrase, is what about a permanent use for something like the rail yard market? I think the answer is the same as we answered with regard to the Locomotive Society, that there's nothing to prevent a nonprofit from proposing a permanent activity on the site. Now, that is a more rigorous proposal involving financial matters and the cities, cannot donate something. Anti-donation is an issue in the state constitution. But there's no reason that any nonprofit organization could not propose a project on the site. So that's answer one. Answer two about a longer term lease is something that has not been addressed or anticipated in the plan. And I would ask.
I mean,
for
I
discussion.
think as we talked about with the land uses, the idea would be that the use of the market would be allowed. And then, yeah, I think Councilor Benton has described maybe some of the challenges, certainly not impossible to go through that process to move from interim or temporary to permanent. I think there's a mechanism to do that. But that would be from a use standpoint. I think it would be allowed. Right?
The use would be absolutely allowed
Right.
on the site. I don't think we've ever had as a board a lot of discussion about public maintaining ownership and becoming a landlord to longer term leases. But I don't think there's anything to prevent that either. We're not, within this land use plan, we're not anticipating how that would occur, right?
Right.
Somebody could say, I want to buy that one building and here's the parcel I'd like to buy from the city and I'm going to do something with it. Or I don't think there's anything to preclude somebody saying, oh, I have a use that's allowed on this list. I can provide a plan that's acceptable to the city and I want to lease it for 2 years, 10 years, whatever it is. I mean, I don't think there's anything that precludes that kind of activity on the part of the city or the private or nonprofit sector.
Wouldn't that apply also to the term table? It's going to kind of be the same concept, so.
I suppose that could be true also, that would remain in public ownership, but be leased to somebody like the Locomotive Society.
It makes sense though, because it keeps, constituting on that site and, and we're able to, invest that money into other parts of the site.
Yeah. Basically property management arrangements, that don't necessarily imply complete transfer of property to a private entity.
Mr. Chair, the rail yards market right now is not a year-round function. It's certain months of the year.
Right. They had their winter market, but primarily it's the spring through fall.
So what's to keep the rail yards market entity from bringing forth a proposal to the city to make it a year-long 24/7 type operation? There's nothing
Nothing.
that's keeping them from
Yeah.
doing that.
exactly what we want to do.
Yeah, but the thing is that I think the city shouldn't be the spearhead in making that happen. I think it's gotta come from, from the grassroots,
Absolutely.
from the entities
Right.
that have created this concept of railroads market and maybe even bring in more partners.
Right.
To where that year-long, 24/7 type concept can really mushroom and develop, beyond what it is now, so. I think that's a challenge to you folks to kind of really, bring that proposal forward and make it happen.
Recognize that challenge. Currently, the rail yards host 165 vendors once a week for 27 days a year, 29 days a year, including the holiday market. Those vendors gross over $2 million in local business sales every year. And we believe that the market with permanent infrastructure like cold storage, grocery distribution, has the capability to be funded with public and private dollars, either LEDA funds, state capital outlay, project funds. I think that there's a lot of potential and believe that we set the table every Sunday to make 165 dreams come true, and we think we could do it year round.
That's feasible. I mean, it's a city property. So you would qualify for capital outlay. Naturally, that portion being funded by capital outlay would remain in the hands of the city, but you'd be the operators in terms of maintaining it, moving it, expanding it, etc. So I think a really well thought out plan can really kind of catapult, the status of the rail market, to new heights.
And the rail yards meeting.
Good point. That's a really important point, and I'm glad we had that wrap up discussion because, my sense is the rail yards market has been under this thing where they've got to go to the cultural service department, get a special use permit every time they have the market. I mean, it's they need more of a structure that could be long-term, and that could be it, a lease of a city-owned property. Any other discussions? Council, go ahead.
Do you want to do the minutes?
Yes, I did one of the minutes. So I forgot the other one. Or did I just do the agenda?
You did one. You did one.
I think I did the December 1st minutes. So is that correct? I did December 1st, but not April.
I don't know if you could find it.
Let's just keep
Let me see. Yeah, I didn't.
Cover our bases and do both.
I didn't snap that I had both of them. We approved the minutes of August 4th.
No, those have already been approved at the last meeting. Today's agenda is the December 1st, 21 and the April 2nd, 22.
Okay, well, let's just do it again to make sure we covered it since we have a quorum. All those, I'll move approval of the minutes of December 1st, 2021.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? That passes. I'll move approval of the minutes of April 2nd, 2022 meeting.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes, and that passes. And wow, we almost got finished on time. So thanks, everybody, and really appreciate
Thank
your
you.
presence
Thank
and
you.
the discussion.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't.